Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 281, and we're going to talk about socialism today. I forget why, but it just came to mind today that I should talk about socialism. Um, yeah, I just can't remember why I thought of doing that. I have talked about socialism a couple of times before, but I went back and looked at my notes, and I really didn't get into a lot of detail. So a little bit more detail, try to fit it into 20 minutes. But also, socialism, anyway, is if we look at Merriam-Webster's dictionary, it says any various egalitarian economic and political theories or movements advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods, which is a mouthful, right? And I'll give you a more simplified subjective professor definition in a moment. But I do want to give a nod to democratic socialism, which a lot of people love throwing around these days. Oh, not socialism, democratic socialism. A political movement calling for the establishment of a decentralized socialist economic system within a democratically run political system. And if you ever talk to a democratic socialist, right, they emphasize the democracy aspect of it. It's like, oh, no, no, but we're voting for this, and so it makes it okay. Well, the joke is on you. I've talked about democracy before, but democracy is socialism. If you look at the Communist Manifesto, uh, I believe it's at the end of chapter 2, he talks about democracy, right? Communism is government by the people. And it's a sort of bait and switch where you're like, oh, yeah, yeah, government by the people, not by an elite. But if you ever look at so-called communistic, socialistic countries, right, there's only one party, right? So everyone's voting, sure, but there's only one choice, right? So look at what is it? Even in Russia, apparently opposition parties often, well, Putin, I mean, it's no secret, I think, imprisoned his opposition. And I did a little more digging, and it turns out that that person is not a nice person, right? It's almost criminal. So was he imprisoned because he was the opposition party, or was he imprisoned because uh, he was a criminal? It's up to you to figure that one out. But that's the joke, right? Democratic socialism. Well, it's the same thing. It's an exercise in tautology. If we were to use that academic expression, you're just basically saying the same thing. So, for example, seminary school. Well, seminary means an institution of education. So to say, it's like saying school. Like I'm going to school. I'm going to college school, going to university school. I mean, you're saying the same thing again. So democratic socialism is basically saying socialism, or communism, socialism, same thing, And some of you might be cringing and saying, "Oh, you can't be so sloppy with the definitions." Oh yeah, I can, right? And the way that we do this is once you have a definition which explains all the different varieties of that term, then you have a good definition, which brings to light when people put little quantifiers or qualifying adjectives in front of that term, then you know what they're trying to do is they're trying to narrow the subjectivity. They're trying to narrow your perspective to not to take into consideration certain exceptions or certain phenomena, which makes it difficult to sell you something. All right. So socialism, okay, people, I've heard that was problematic. No, democratic socialism. And so then they get to proceed to explain to you how they have liberated themselves from all the problems that you think exist with socialism. I hope that makes sense. That's how people do it. That's why people do what they do. But socialism, broadly speaking, if you pull back in my reset perspective method, which I talked about very early in this channel, basically, all it is taking the power of choice out of the hands of the individual and putting it into the hands of bureaucracy. All right. A lot of people say, oh no, we're taking it out of the hands of evil people and we're giving it to the people. Well, I have never made and I've never been consulted on any of the policies that have been made in Washington, D.C. And so the power of choice is taken out of my hands, power of an individual, and put into the hands of bureaucracy. If you want to call them the people, whatever, but people has a different meaning for you than it has for me. Okay. And so this way of classification of broadening the definition, some people might say, oh, you're making it the definition too broad, too general, so therefore you're talking about nothing. No, no. We do it in science all of the time. And if you go back to my balkanization episode, you can see that we do this all the time in science, right? So in biology, there's the whole phylum, genus, class, species, right? Species, right? So you're breaking them into categories, right? And so if we're of the same species, then you can break it down any way you want, but we're still the same species. And you can do class, right? And so how broad you want to be, right? Then we have that kind of breakdown. So there's the phylum, I think they're the two, right? They're the animals and plants, right? And that's a too broad, breakdown from which everything else, gets into more specifics, right? So anyway, so I'm using that approach where socialism is like a phylum, right? Or maybe a genus or maybe even a class. And so within that class, you have all these different species, right? You have all these different forms, but it's all socialism, okay? And so a small group of people, unnamed generally, right? So the politicians that we see and most people vote for, they are clearly not the people making the decisions. They're just simply the mouthpieces to give people the impression that you're actually voting for change or something. But someone, and you can tell because right now Biden clearly doesn't even know what day of the week it is, but all of these things are happening by America, right? We're ramping up wars, aggression, hostility all over the place. Who's doing it? Well, clearly it's not the president. It's not Congress, obviously. It's whoever the so-called deep state is. And so the real government is sort of showing itself a little bit right now. And the more incompetent and useless the politician is, the more you can see the deep state, right? Which is why Donald Trump was such a big threat, right? Because he was going to make it obvious that, well, at least he says he is, that he's going to do this. And so clearly, if they're going to do something different, then the deep state is fighting against Donald Trump, which is, anyway, how I understood the whole everything that happened since 2016, right? All these things happening that makes Donald Trump look bad or implicates him in whatever conspiracy theory, right? All of that is deep state stuff because he's interfering with what government actually is doing, right? The people who are actually running this country, he's interfering with their plans on what they want to do. So, in order for socialism to gain power, take it away from the individual and give it more to themselves, right? They focus on certain aspects or certain issues, right? And I've talked about the whole issue versus principle idea way back when, right? So, politicians like to focus on issues. That way, everyone only hears about an issue and what the right position, what the right stance is on that issue or so-called correct one is. This way, you can have contradictory, hypocritical issues, right? The issue and the response, it be a collection of hypocritical ideas that cannot work together. But since you focused only on issues one at a time, people don't realize that it's hypocritical, contradictory, absurd, right? Inconsistent, whatever, right? So people miss it that way. All right. So when the bureaucracy makes the choices for everyone, you no longer have the power, but you still have to pay for the cost of those policies, those decisions, and worse still, you have to pay for the mistakes of all of those policymakers, right? The deep state. We'll call it the deep state just for simplicity's sake, right? Because we can't say that the president is actually right, Biden right now is responsible for all the stuff that's going on every day. No, I don't think so. So it's the deep state, however you want to look at it, whoever you want to say is implicated in it, whether it's the agents of the deep state or the deep state itself, whatever. I'm cool. Again, reset perspective. I'm cool with whatever you want to say. So what do they focus on? They focus on your food. Oh, it's got to be, we got to make the food better, safer. Maybe it's machines and the whole means of production thing. Oh, the workers should be owners of the business, that kind of thing. Luxury items, maybe. We have too many. Maybe they want to focus on children, right? And then, but generally, what you have to realize is that money or currency is the key, right? Focusing on money. So you can see right now that Fed meetings, which used to not be a big deal, is pretty much the focus of a lot of stockbrokers, Bitcoiners, and whatnot, right? Because their words affect so much more, right? And if you listen to Monaco 64, then you know that the bond market, which is all about currency, is very much affected by Fed policy. And the bond market apparently is the most important market, globally speaking, particularly because the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. Okay, so getting back to the socialism thing, and so it's by focusing on various issues one at a time that the rest of society is now controlled by the bureaucracy, right? By the people, like they like to say, right? And then they do this by making an argument, knowledge production, which is something I talked about also early in the channel, right? You make knowledge, you hire people, professors, scientists to do research, to publish papers, right? Which have very specific conclusions. You say, I want to be able to say this, write a paper so that it justifies it. Okay. Not in so many words, but you can kind of read between the lines and see that that's what goes on. We fund that too, right? The production of misinformation. Yeah, we pay for that, which is insult on top of injury. But what they do is they then use a moral argument, and so to sell whatever idea they want to control your food or luxury items or your children or the education system, whatever. And so if you oppose it because you don't want to lose more choice, then you are immoral. Okay. So using a moral argument is for that purpose. So if you oppose it, they can turn around and say, oh, see, you're immoral. They did that. And I've talked about how they did that with Antifa. We're anti-fascist. And so if you oppose Antifa, then you must be a fascist, right? It's so simple to the point of stupidity that it works, right? Because America has been dumbed down so much that they actually fall for this kind of stuff, right? And not just America, obviously, the rest of the world, a lot of people in the world fall for this crap as well. And so, really, by using that moral argument, it has nothing to do with whatever it is they're grandstanding about. It's how the method they're using to gain more control as they take it away from you. So you have less power, less freedom, less control over your life, and they now control more of it. So at first, you can go back 100 years or yeah, 150 years, and it's only over a couple of things. And so only small minorities are affected in the country, like farmers or the auto industry or clothing manufacturers, okay, or even farmers of very specific crops, right? And so it's a minority that's affected, and so no one really cares. Socialists hate them anyway, right? Because they're factory owners, they're rich capitalists, and so bankrupting them, forcing them out of business, well, that's a good thing in the eyes of the socialists. But of course, that's the sort of joke, right? Because then all of those industry, the factories, the jobs, right? Because socialists are supposedly all about the workers. They all go overseas, right? And then the socialists complain again, all over again. It's I've been talking about that in various episodes lately, right? So they create a problem and then they blame capitalism for all the garbage that they themselves have created. Uh, Bankers create inflation, children become the property of the state. So a bureaucracy has gotten so big that the average person like me or you, we can't do anything about it. I mean, we can make podcasts about it, but we have no power, right? We have no influence over anyone. Maybe a person like Joe Rogan has a lot of influence, but he's all over the place, and that's not his shtick, right? I mean, he talks to anyone about everything. I mean, he talks about UFOs to the jab. I mean, he talks about anything and everything, whatever he's in the mood to talk about. Okay. Which is actually the way most people are, but he's more interested in his podcast, I think, than actually trying to bring change in society, although he does take specific stands every once in a while. So in this process where the state has become so big we can't do anything about it, the people are slaves of the state, right? Uh, in part, like in specific areas of when we look at specific area parts of the bureaucracy, is we say, okay, well, it has nothing to do with me. But as a whole, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't, right? And so it's not like even sitting on the fence, yeah, you're damned. All right. So if we're in a situation now where we entrust the bureaucracy with responsibility, and what do? They start wars. They fail in diplomacy, right? There are diplomats, are ambassadors, and you know, instead of engaging in diplomacy, we just simply call other people evil. They're in charge of national security, but they fail at it, start a war, and then call it terrorism. They fail in banking, and then they start a war. We'll call it national security. Fail in managing trade, right? This is the bureaucracy, the socialists, right? They control all this stuff. And because they fail, they start a war, and prior to start having the war, they call it trade sanctions. Now, socialism uses, abuses, abuses virtues to hide their malfeasance, right? Which is basic bad behavior, right? Corrupted behavior. So they continue to keep using virtue signaling, moralizing, to hide all of the evil crap that they are doing. Now, the suckers in the country, they fall for it every single time. And the people who, get so excited whenever they hear another controversy, these are not serious people, right? And there are a lot of unserious people in society, right? Because if you just think about it for a moment, then you realize that you're being lied to, right? They created the problem. Now they're trying to cover it up, and people believe that stuff. It's kind of crazy. Even me when I was a teenager, and I kept seeing the pattern of, oh, failed policy. Wait a minute, what? Why aren't people getting punished? And you just saw more of the same. So I worked out that something was really wrong, which is why I walked away and was disinterested in politics and politicians for decades, right, before coming back and finding Ron Paul. But anyway, so that's socialism, right? We give up our power, our freedom to other people, and we entrust them with responsibility, and all they do is start wars, right? Make trouble, start wars, and enrich themselves in the process. So in a way, they're the modern day Vikings, right? They plunder us to enrich themselves, where they themselves produce nothing. All they do is bring destruction and a loss of value to the world. So once again, freedom is the winner. And that is how I distinguish socialism from not socialism. If whatever policy or position, moral or otherwise, that you take infringes on my freedom, takes away my freedom, takes away my power of choice, then you're being socialist. Okay. You're being socialistic, right? So if you give up your freedom, uh, then you are giving it up for something that is socialistic in nature, right? So you will no longer have the power of choice, but you have to pay for that other thing that they decide that we're going to do instead. And you have to pay for it when everything goes wrong. Enough time has gone by now that we know that even if some people believe the original selling rhetoric, right, the intent, uh, yeah, it was socialism, right, and that's what was going on. The people were pushing socialism. In a free society, the person making the choice is the one who's responsible, and that person must pay. And clearly, the average individual does not have that much in the way of money and resources. And so they're going to be extremely careful about the decisions that they make, or at least that's the way it should be and would be if we had our freedom restored to us. Now, if we can hold politicians responsible and make them pay for their mistakes, for example, if they vote for war, then they have to spend a minimum of 4 weeks on the front lines. I'm not talking like, pretend front line. I'm talking front lines in the trenches. Then okay, you can vote for war, but none of them would survive, right? Which is fine by me. Uh, because one knows that they can pass responsibility off to someone else. Uh, they don't care, right? And that's why they're ultra evil and corrupt. Um, right now, my hopes of a free society, or more free society, a less socialistic society with Donald Trump is fading. I was hoping and pulling for Musk and Ramaswamy, but I don't know. Who knows, right? I mean, maybe even just a little bit is a lot better. I'll admit that anything at this point by these people would probably be better than what Harris and Waltz would have done to us, right? There would be no stopping to all of this lame duck activity that we see going on. Maybe financial system crashing might be the only way. But then, of course, even if it did, roaches have a way of surviving and then coming back and reestablishing themselves. So there's that, right? But that is what socialism is, basically taking away your freedom, your ability to solve problems, to get over things quickly, or even finding and researching and producing better ideas, innovative ideas. And instead, we put it into the hands of corrupt individuals who create problems and then make us pay not only for the problem, but for the cost of trying to pretend to try to fix that problem as well. So nothing good in socialism. You can have moral opinions, your own opinions about what is right and wrong, but that is yourself. You can't force other people to change their mind, and no one is stopping you from helping and doing whatever, you know, anything that you want, uh, because it's you who is going to be responsible for all of the cost and the consequences. That's it for this episode. I'm really, this was hanging on my head. I needed to do an episode because I have to write a book review tonight. So got to finish that up and then turn that in. So that's it. I'll talk to you guys next time.